Alright, I am back with another Destiny 2 video, and for everyone who's saying Evie is not around in the background of my videos enough, there you go, presenting Miss Evie. What do you say, Evie? You gonna stay around? You have to, because the door's shut. Today I wanted to expand a little bit on an article I wrote earlier that was based on some information I saw after the month of March that Destiny 2 just had its highest highest average player count in a given month since Shadowkeep. I forget what exactly, it was like 135,000 to Shadowkeep's, I think 162,000 on average. The launch of Lightfall already brought the highest concurrent player peak for Destiny and all the, the pre-hype from Lightfall leading into that. But some people may be surprised to see that it is that high of an average. And honestly, it's only because, obviously I don't think Shadowkeep itself was very good, but that is also the moment that Destiny 2 first appeared on Steam, and also when the game went free-to-play. So that was back when free-to-play actually had Red War campaign, the DLCs, the first 3 seasons, all as part of the free content. Lord knows, I think we all miss those days, but that is a big reason why the concurrent players were so high for that initial month there. Sorry, average players. And it's interesting because obviously this creates a little bit of surprise in the community because generally speaking, it seemed like the reaction to Lightfall was pretty poor. So you could say, okay, I get why it had the highest concurrent players at launch, but then people didn't like it, and so why would average players be so high for the month after? Well, okay, I think this stems from a few things. First of all, real life is not Twitter or Reddit. I think those sites are prone to a bit of hyperbole, as I can be myself sometimes, and the general reaction to something may be a lot different than what Twitter or Destiny the Game Reddit dictates. And there were all these threads about, oh, this is like a low point for the series, this is like the worst launch since Curse of Osiris, and okay, we gotta calm down and take a step back here. So it's fairly obvious to me what happened here, in that I think that everyone's first initial reactions to Lightfall, almost everyone, was it was bad because the campaign was bad, and specifically the story of the campaign was bad. I would make the argument that the campaign itself, from a gameplay perspective, other than one-shotting Threshers, and other than maybe a lot of those awkward Strand segments, going back to play it now, having access to your full kit, I think it is a well-designed campaign for the most part. Probably not as good as Witch Queen, but still pretty good. It was the story that was bad, and the story is not, in hindsight, it's like, oh, maybe we underrated that. No, it's still bad. And any post-seasonal explanation they give of the Veil is not going to really change things. You're not going to change Nimbus, the Radial Mast, I would say the misuse of Callus. I don't think the raid changed anything about the story because it was this totally separate Nezarec thing. But that was everyone's first impression, because that's what you do when a new expansion launches. You play the story. Everyone played through. They were expecting something on par with the Witch Queen. It was not that. It was not even close to the Witch Queen. I would argue it's probably the worst seasonal expansion story maybe since Shadowkeep. Even Shadowkeep is better, honestly, because fundamentally the story of Shadowkeep is about Eris and her, helping deal with her Lost Fire team, and the discovery of the pyramids for the first time, and the stuff that haunts us. So that was probably even a better story. It wasn't a better campaign, certainly gameplay wise, but probably a better story than Mr. Radial Mast and the Veil here. But that was one piece of a very, very large expansion and seasonal launch. And I would say almost everything else, outside of a few nitpicks, has been very good. So, there's a lot of stuff we can go through that turned out to be a lot better than maybe you anticipated originally. I think the best example of this is Strand. The introduction of Strand and weaving it into the campaign in the awkward way that they did was a very poor way to start things. Strand should have been its own side quest of Strand training. It should not have been 3 of the 8 missions, which essentially it was. Two of the missions were fully just Strand training exercises against the Vex, which is bad narratively. It was bad from a gameplay perspective too, because you would, at least for a couple boss fights, including the final Callus boss fight, you're not 100% forced to use Strand in all of them. Like the Callus fight, you don't have to, but it's very much designed around it. But the problem is like you're geared up for your Void build or Solar build, and suddenly you're using Strand. You don't have any of the fragments. You don't have a Strand exotic to help you. You don't have Strand mods in place. So you're using like a neutered version of it, although also in some ways you're using a better version of it because you have the grapple, and then you got out of the campaign, and you're like, my grapple cooldown is terrible. But once you unlock all the exotics, once you unlock all the fragments, Strand feels great. Strand is a fantastic addition to the game. I think it is close to the best subclass they've ever added. Like, I don't know, I'm not saying it's like the best endgame DPS mob clearing subclass ever. I'm not saying it's the best in that sense. I think it's one of the most creative, interesting, and fun subclasses the game has ever made, if not the most. It is hard to take it off. I've enjoyed using it immensely. Some of this may be due to some of the seasonal mods, like the ones especially that create these giant Warmind cells suspending explosions, which will not be the case when the seasonal model goes away, but generally speaking, I have really enjoyed Strand. Other things that have gone well, I think that the difficulty changes were kind of a mixed bag. So I think in some ways the difficulty changes worked where I don't mind a lot of enemies hitting harder, but the problem was the enemy health thing. We have lingering problems with raid enemy health, and that it's like weirdly easy, and somehow enemies have less health than Neomuna Patrol. But I do think it feels better than before, with everything just being an utter pushover, especially with the recent changes they made to health cuts, and then they're about to make a bunch of changes to primary weapons too, which will make us even stronger. So some correction was needed, but I don't think that like ruined the expansion. For instance, running the legendary campaign, I think still felt really good. Neomuna, once you were a little more prepared for it, once you get kind of a terminal overload build or whatever, enemies are tanky, but I don't think it's like insurmountable. The worst things were Legend, Nightfalls, and Lost Sectors, and those have been course corrected at least a little bit, and things have gotten better there. Neomuna itself, I would say, has really grown on me. There were a lot of complaints that it was very dead and stuff, and whatever, but like, I don't know if those were the most fair comparisons because like, okay, how alive is the Throne World or Europa? Like, I don't know, like, Bungie's patrol areas have never been, like, the most living and breathing spots. Like, that's never really been a signature of patrol areas, so I feel like we're judging Neomuna a little bit. I understand there's some, like, people wishing that you could go on more skyscrapers and it would be more focused on verticality and Strand and stuff, but generally speaking, I like the zone. I do like a lot of the lore attached to it. I think all of the interesting Neomuna story stuff happened essentially after the campaign. The Rohan mission was like, the Rohan exotic mission was probably one of the best narrative missions they did. It was like the only good Nimbus mission, essentially. I think it should have happened during the campaign. A lot of interesting stuff with, the different characters in Neomuna, even though they're just kind of floating holograms. And then finally Osiris kind of stopped being as cranky as he was by the end of that. Season of Defiance also, I think, at least started off very strong. I think the rescue battlegrounds are some of the best they've made, honestly. They are borderline just strikes. I know Neomuna lacks strikes, certainly. It has one new strike. It's okay. But, I mean, these battlegrounds might as well be strikes at this point. In some ways, they're even more interesting and engaging than strikes. And I think we're even moving past the initial battlegrounds from a full year ago were just like, okay, well, no, it was 2 years ago, wasn't it? Whenever Chosen was, it was like 2.5. It was just like, okay, we're in a patrol space. Here's 2 giant patrol zones. Throw 3 balls at 3 things, clear out all the enemies, and that was it. And I like that to a certain extent because there's mob density and stuff, but these new ones, there's a lot more mechanics, there's a lot more areas, even if some of it is reused, it feels a lot better and a lot more involved. And I think that has gone really well. The whole Amanda Holiday thing, we can debate that and stuff, but generally speaking, I think there were a lot of good Defiance story moments, certainly more so than there were in the Lightfall campaign. But zooming back from this specific stuff, I think we also have to recognize that overall, like Lightfall campaign issues aside, like commendations being somewhat annoying, and then some of the difficulty issues, Destiny is in a really good, healthy place compared to where it used to be. Uh, we have seen a ton of additions to the game, since it launched with Shadowkeep. Ones that make it a lot more playable, a lot more, there's a lot more to do for a lot longer if you want to, but it's not like necessarily mandatory. I'm talking about things like the introduced loadouts this season. It is really easy to build craft and make loadouts. They fixed the transmog grind at least a little bit a while back, so you have more opportunities to unlock more outfits just through gameplay and running rituals and stuff. There is way more loot to farm than there ever has been, both in this expansion and this season specifically, but a lot more is added, a lot more interesting loot has been added, and then we have racked up a good total of dungeons and raids you can farm now. Many of those have been reprised in some way to offer crafted weapons. Crafted weapons are also their own form of grind that really did not exist before, and while they can be frustrating depending on the source and trying to get things to drop, some improvements have been made to that over time, and it is not quite as bad as it used to be, including the kind of elimination of most of the currency grind for that. And that has been a real motivator for people to chase. There's just a lot more stuff to do. And obviously the game is still lacking in some significant areas. PvP is, as always, underdeveloped, but even there they have tried to do a lot of things with, loot incentives and, the best SMG to farm in trials and things. So like there's reasons to play it. Obviously the thing that has suffered the most is Gambit, with essentially no new changes in years. But even Gambit is like pretty fun to play now, even if it's not rewarding, based on the changes that have been made to it over time. It just needs more maps. That's the main issue. But like the game is in a very healthy, robust place, and over time, Bungie has really been able to scale up, especially their seasonal offerings and also the sandbox changes they made to the game. So like they're delivering bigger seasons than ever before. Last year, you may debate the content of like Season of Plunder, or like it wasn't a good storyline, or it was too easy or whatever, but like the amount of content they're delivering per season now is huge. The amount of sandbox changes they're rolling out at any given time is a lot bigger than it used to be. We spent all last year getting huge subclass updates, which I would say on the whole went fantastically and have made the game feel better than ever before to play, which is saying something considering one of the appeals of Destiny at its core is that it feels so good to play and its gunplay is so good. Making that even better is pretty amazing, and I think they did a fantastic job with that. As they did with Strand, I'm going to miss Kevin Yanis, who has been a real driving force behind this stuff, because he's moving to a different Bungie project. And I don't even know if we should get a 6 club subclass. I'll do a whole video on that later, but I think the game is in a really good spot in terms of overall things to grind for, whether that's loot or whether that's titles or triumphs or crafting weapons or just a million different things. If you want to, they're there. And at least right now, before Lightfall, it had really developed from a storytelling perspective. And like players who are joining now can go back and play the really excellent Witch Queen storyline if they want, for instance. And just the game has become, way more than it used to be when Shadowkeep launched in a lot of ways. The exception to this is obviously content vaulting, and it has also lost a lot of stuff along the way, which I think is a problem. But they have really ramped up how they are able to produce content, the volume of that content, the quality of that content, I'd argue. And the whole narrative about Lightfall being this big disaster for Destiny is really just based mostly on the story campaign. And just the story of the campaign, not even necessarily the mechanics of the campaign. That was everyone's first impression. It was very bad, but this narrative that, Destiny 2 is the worst it's ever been because of that, that didn't really last for more than like a week. And like once everyone beat the campaign and started doing all this other stuff and started grinding their favorite activities and messing with loadouts and Strand and all that stuff, that kind of faded away. Like the story is not, it doesn't get better in hindsight. And yet I don't think it is bad enough to just ruin everything else. The story is like, 5%, 10% of like the total playtime I've done with this expansion in the season. it is not. It is the most prominent public part of it, but it is not kind of the all-encompassing experience. And when I think you zoom out and you view how Destiny is as a whole right now, I do understand how these average player numbers could be this high, because I think interest in the franchise is only increasing in time, which is hugely implausible given that we are in year 6 of Destiny 2 and what, year 9 of the franchise as a whole. Like, that seems insane that it would still be growing to a certain extent, but here we are, and that is the power of Destiny, and that's why Bungie, despite the final shape coming, they're never gonna ditch Destiny. Like, it is, if anything, almost as, more popular than it's ever been. I don't know if I can do all that exact math, but like, other than maybe like D2 vanilla launch, like, I think we are in a, almost uncharted territory. And certainly for games that are 7 years old, like, this doesn't happen too often, where a game survives this long in the first place, and B, interest in that game is essentially expanding in time rather than contracting. So that's pretty unique and cool to see. So that's my take on the whole average player count thing. And, I don't think we'll really see those numbers topped again until potentially the final shape, because now we're just moving into the seasonal model, and that's just sort of logical. But on the whole, maybe this year, like year over year, will be higher on average than last year. And we'll keep an eye on that as time goes on. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you soon. Take care.